Back in the early 80s, when I was in 3rd grade, we had a family camping trip. Everything was great for the first couple of days. Not a cloud was in the sky, gorgeous sunset, and warm air with the gentlest of breezes. Everything was idyllic until about 3 in the morning the 3rd day. It started raining, which woke my brother up. He went to the restroom with my mom. As I drifted back to sleep, I heard my dad yelling at my mom to quit messing with the flap. Then, I heard the unmistakable clank of the aluminum pole hit the ground and the corner of the tent flopping down. My dad started yelling and using language directed at my mom that I had never heard him use. He then stepped out of the tent and I heard him call out for my mom. I heard her in the distance asking why he was yelling. He explained to her what happened. Then, it started getting windy and my dad shouted, "Hurry up. Get in the tent." There was a loud patter of what I thought was rain, followed by what sounded like someone punching the tent. A few minutes later, it was peaceful. A dead calm took over the night. I could hear my parents whispering, "I dunno, what do you think we should do? Do you think it's safe?" Suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge gust of wind came. We could feel the floor of the tent come up a little, as the wind blew under it. Then the pole that my dad had just put back came loose again. We could hear the metallic clang as it bounced into the distance. The tent suddenly seemed like it was a dancing man as that corner started flopping in all directions. "Okay, to the van it is." We ran to the van to hide. During the whole 15 yards, we were pelted with pea-sized hail. My mom had to hold my brother because of how strong the winds were. As soon as we got into the van, we saw the tent completely collapse and start to lift up. Fortunately, the stakes were driven in quite well so it stayed in place. Then, everything went dead silent. After what seemed like an eternity of holding my breath, I drifted off to sleep. We were all woken by a sharp rap against the window. The park ranger was there to let us know that they were closing the campgrounds. We looked out the windows and saw a clear path, where a tornado had torn through, not even a quarter of a mile from our spot, and our tent was on top of the trees. If we had stayed in the tent, we would probably have been up there as well. Getting out of the van, we found that it had been pushed about 5 feet from where it was parked. Figuring that the rest of the trip would be a waste without the tent, we decided to leave. Stopping at the ranger station on the way out, we found out that the tornado sirens had failed when the tornado had taken out the power lines that lead to the park. On the ride home, we saw several spots where tornadoes had touched down. It took another couple of years before we went camping again because my brother was so traumatized. On every Memorial Day, a couple of friends of mine and I would hike the Appalachian Trail. True to our libertarian philosophy, we always stayed off the trails so we would be on federal land and not subject to state, local, or trail restrictions. It was ultralight hiking and we only had enough food for 4 days, and only minimal backup or spares of things like socks, and no extras like a folding seat or a small gas burner to heat food. I'm a seasoned hiker and taught my companions how to rough it. They worked for me and were about 20 years younger than I. They are great guys and I would do anything to help them. They had told me years before about their camping and how awesome and cool it was. One year, they asked if I wanted to see a video of their trip. They showed me the video of their recent trip during the summer months. Their idea of camping consisted of a cozy cabin, coolers of beer, pizza, and a PlayStation. I shook my head and said, "That's camping where I come from." I told them about ultralight hiking or camping, tents, rations, and being able to light a fire in the pouring rain, which was something I had learned long ago. Fast forward to the prior weekend before the trip. One of the guys called me and we all met at his house. He was visibly shaken. He had run across a recording on the internet. It was supposed to be of a Bigfoot yelling in the woods. The kid, who was in his early 20s, wanted to call off the trip. The other two just sat there silent. It reminded me of the day they showed me a stupid website that told about some missing kids in the woods and the video that was found. It was for a movie called The Blair Witch Project. I told them it was fake. They accused me of being closed-minded, and that video was real. The same thing happened here. I told them the recording was fake and the Bigfoot myth was for stupid. I said that, even if I was right, we should worry about bears attacking us. I told them we could cancel the trip, but I refused to go camping in a cabin with a PlayStation. I could do that at home. I also told them I would be carrying a .45 caliber pistol, and let them know I was a superb marksman, which I am, so they didn't need to worry. The person who asked about bears breathed a sigh of relief. So you'll be able to shoot a bear if it comes for us. Cool, I'm in, he said. I clarified my statement, noting that, if a bear is charging me, or anyone, a .45 probably won't take the bear down. He asked me why I couldn't just shoot the bear in the head. I explained, the slope of a bear is such that, even if you have the time, aim, and shoot, if you don't aim just right, the bullet will travel up the skull and deflect away from the creature, only pissing him off more. He asked me what the gun was for. I replied, in worst case, try to scare a bear, and in best case, if one of us is injured and we can't get a phone signal, we fire 3-shot, which is the universal distress signal for help. But this didn't help matters. So I gave them a pep talk and tried to instill a little confidence. I told them there was no such thing as Bigfoot, and assured them that the odds of being attacked by a bear was just too remote a thing to happen, because bears were more afraid of humans. I told them there was a greater chance of them being hit by lightning than running into a bear. It didn't work either. So, I attacked their manhood without shame. That worked and the trip was on. The first trip was a disaster. They brought folding chairs, cans of food, and other useless crap. I rolled my eyes and went through their backs, dumping items I deemed useless. Like unopened beer cans, a packet of ramen, and a Harry Potter book. Too much weight, I said, and handed the stuff to one of the guy's girlfriend who drove us up from Boston. We started on the path into the wilderness. It was late, 5 p.m., and getting dark. I figured we could do 10 miles and sleep for the night. We headed up a steep incline for about 3 miles. They were very tired at that point. I sighed and figured this was going to be a tough trip, and was determined a bit to see it to the end. At the 5-mile point, they wanted to set up their tents. They were exhausted, and we decided to set up camp. I had just bought nice hammock, which was new on the market. So I was set up in 5-minute flat for one of the best night sleeps I ever had, like sleeping on a cloud. One of the guys couldn't set up his tent. Another broke the rods needed to set up his tent, and the third guy had a lame blanket instead of a warm sleeping bag. It was ridiculous. I did the best I could to get them settled, but one said he twisted his ankle and had to go home. So we called his dad after we found a cell phone signal. His dad picked us up about 5 hours later, after we hiked back down the trail in total darkness. I was upset, but tried not to show it. I was determined to take them camping. I mean, the real camping. For the next year, we would meet from time to time and I would teach them fire starting skills, map orientation, and basic first aid. We would share literature on camping and explore trails of internet using a map program called Topos. I took one target shooting and we got him a permit. This gave them confidence for the next trip, and I felt I could rely on them in the wilderness. The next trip was close to perfect. They did fine and loved it. We decided to make it a yearly event. We spent many Memorial Day vacations in the wilderness after that. It was fun and they learned to rough it. One year, we settled on Mount Whiteface in New Hampshire. There was no snow at the lower elevation in the wilderness area and we maintained a steady pace. But then, we came up on a 20-foot, sheer cliff with no way around. They wanted to turn back. I dropped my pack and pulled out some rope. I used that rope to hang food high in the trees to keep the bears and other critters away. I told them I would scale the cliff, drop the rope, and pull up all our gear. I told them to go slow and to be safe climbing the cliff. I scaled the cliff and pulled up all the gear. They began to scale the cliff following the path I took, and I waited. The sun felt warm. I laid down and closed my eyes. I started to doze off, but then the ground started to rumble. It was as if the granite face cliff were going to explode. I sat up to see a military plane, a Warthog, do a banking turn not far from my position. I could see the pilot's helmet as he sped past. I thought he was looking straight at me. It was a rush. I later found out the military used the terrain for pilots to practice as the terrain was similar to Afghanistan. When the others reached my location, we marveled at what had just happened and headed on into the wilderness, ready to reach the top and set up camp. It was late May, and the higher the elevation we went, the deeper the snow got. It didn't really worry us that much. I figured we could go a little further, set up camp, light a fire, and relax very soon. At one point, near the peak, we got lost. The snow was knee-deep. We were unsure of our location and I pulled out my GPS. I couldn't get a signal. One of them pulled out a phone and couldn't get a signal too. We kept trudging through the snow until we ran across a fissure or gully. There was a small patch of ground that had no snow on the other side of the gully. We crossed it and noticed something. It was a set of fresh boot marks in the snow, walking away from the gully. The tracks appeared fresh. My initial feeling was one of disappointment that we had to share the woods with another human other than our group. I lived for getting out of the city and I wanted to be alone. It was a spiritual thing for me. We were supposed to be in the wilderness alone and miles from anyone. But the track said otherwise. We were around 3,000 feet in elevation. I began to think the boot tracks was a hunter, which made me nervous. We didn't have orange vests, and I was afraid of being mistaken as game. But the hunter thing didn't make sense. It wasn't hunting season, and game wouldn't be that far up, unless it was an illegal hunt. None of it made any sense. I told the guys to stay close and we would follow the tracks a bit. I did it just out of curiosity. So we followed the boot tracks for about 1.5 miles. The snow got knee-deep and the tracks went farther into the wilderness. Then they just stopped. It was weird. They just stopped in mid-stride with virgin snow all around. We examined the tracks closely. It didn't seem like she or he backtracked, the boot prints would have showed that. And why would a person walk 1.5 miles in deep snow and backtrack his steps in the middle of nowhere? It made no sense and I have no explanation for it. It was just weird and sort of creepy. We finished out the trip, each of us coming up with ideas to explain it. I actually had no clue. Bigfoot Boy still thinks it had something to do with alien abductions. One wondered if the person was lost and they were rescued by a helicopter, lifting him to safety. That didn't make sense as the tree cover was way too thick. I can't explain what I saw. But it was very strange. I still wonder about it to this day. This happened 2 years back when we were just starting our first jobs. Back then, we possessed a risk-taking mindset, and having fear of nothing, we were looking forward to do some thrills and chills. One day, me and my flatmates decided to do camping somewhere, as it was one of our friend's birthday. We planned to celebrate it out somewhere at night. We all took half day off from work on Friday and left for the camping adventure in the evening. We were 5 people in a car, along with some other office friends of that birthday guy. In total, there were 11 of us. We packed everything with us, and on the way we bought pizzas, Coke bottles, and cake too. One of our friends arranged a beautiful location for us and also managed some big lights and other necessary stuffs. We knew there was no light there and it would be so dark that we wouldn't even see each other. So we drove all the way to the outskirts of the city and reached the destination at around 9 p.m. We parked the car, moved out, walked through the campground, explored it a bit using our mobile flashlights, and were trying to find a site where we would pitch our tents. We had partied that night and had so much fun, cracking jokes and laughing loudly. We also danced and played music in our cars loudly. We celebrated the birthday at midnight and had our food and snacks. Rest of us were having drinks then, so me and my friend decided to have a walk around the lake, as we were not into drinking. We were enjoying the walk in the moonlight, and unknowingly, walked a bit away from our camp. It was around 2:30 a.m. and that place was so scary looking at night. As we were walking away, that surrounding was getting quieter and it seemed creepier. There wasn't any noise from the ambient except our footsteps, and our mobile flash was the only source of light. We reached at this particular place, away from the lake, and we didn't want to go ahead anymore as we were already quite far. So we decided to go back after being there for a few minutes. And as we were about to turn and walk back, we felt a cold breeze all of a sudden. We were in complete shock at that moment, as the atmosphere wasn't windy at all. That typical creepy sound of wind freaked us so bad. We ignored the fact and walked away. As we were walking, we were flashing our lights nearby and we felt like we saw something in water as we moved our light there. Then, suddenly, we heard some movement in the water as well and it scared the damn out of us. We were so scared that we ran away speedily from there without looking back, and went straight into our tents and played music in our phone, as we wanted to kill that silence. I still get goosebumps thinking about that moment. It was the scariest thing ever happened to me and I decided that I won't go ever again on such night camps. I hate myself for that decision of going out for a moonwalk at midnight. I mean, we were so stupid then, and that was totally nonsense. There are so many forms of adventures than this crazy thing. That night was really horrible for me and I couldn't sleep all night. I was just praying for the sun to rise up and let us see the morning. Me and my friend didn't tell this incident to anyone as we didn't want to ruin the atmosphere and anyone to freak out. We slept outside for that night, which, to the average camper, probably is like a child's play. But for me, who's never slept a night outdoors in his life, it was not. I didn't expect to experience such scary incident on the very first night of camping of my life. One day at work, me and a couple coworkers were lounging lazily outside, smoking on a break. One of my younger coworkers told us this story, that his dad told him, as it had happened in the recent last couple of years. He explained that his father did some type of work involving checking and diagnosing power lines for problems with electricity. At that time, he was working at a popular ski resort, just a little ways up the hill out of our small historic town. On the evening of the incident, one of the ski lifts was out of order, so he was called at near dark to go check and follow the power lines to find the problem. So he set out equipped with a flashlight to go check it out. After he checked a couple poles and followed the lines, he sat down for a break before continuing. Once finished, he switched on his flashlight in order to see through the falling snow and darkness. In the snowbound silence, he made his way to the next pole, following the nearly invisible power lines against the black sky. As he approached the next pole, he noticed an odd shadow behind it, dancing in the swaying beam of his flashlight. At first, he really wasn't sure what it could possibly be. But as he got closer, he began to get a feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. That feeling grew as he started to realize that he was seeing a pair of legs sticking straight up out of the snow at the base of the power pole. One leg was still attached to a snowboard, while the other leg was free of the board and bent at an angle. Nothing moved, there was only the stillness and silence of the snow, slowly falling around him. He wondered for a few seconds if there was something he could do to help the victim. He decided to run up to the site and try and save the victim by digging them out by hand. He dug and dug, furiously and panicked, only to realize as he dug down enough to expose half of the body, that he was much too late to save them. He's not sure how long he just sat and cried, helpless to save them. Eventually, he got up and went to inform the necessary people of his grisly discovery. But the staff had already known whom he had found. Apparently, earlier that day, a family had reported their daughter missing to the ski resort staff after she had left the group to catch the ski lift up to board back down. When she failed to return after a couple hours, they started to worry. That worry turned to terror after over 8 hours had passed. What had happened was that, on her way down the hill while snowboarding, she most likely noticed the power pole a little late, and trying to stop, she fell headfirst into a tree hollow hole that had formed at the base of the power pole. Unable to dig herself out from being upside down, she eventually suffocated. She had managed to yank one foot loose from the binding on the snowboard in her desperation to free herself. To me, that was the most terrifying part. I was 18 and backpacking in the Ozarks with my grandma and mom. We had been walking for the entire day, like you do when backpacking, and were trying to find a place to set up the camp for the night. An important thing to mention is that the Ozark Trail is dead in the middle of the wilderness. There is no people there. You are completely alone, and you very rarely hear any signs of life. It's just you and the empty woods. We had no means of defending ourselves, because when you go backpacking, you want to bring the bare minimum. You have to carry essentials, such as food, clothing, medical supplies, toiletries, tents, sleeping bags, etc. You want to make sure all these things are as light as possible because you have to carry it all by yourself for several days. So, something like a gun is too heavy to bring. We certainly wished we had a gun on that night though. It had been raining, so the rivers had ridden up. This made it quite hard for us to get to a good place to set up camp. You see, we had printed out several maps of the trail and they showed where good places to camp were. The only camp spot that was close was across a river that was way too deep and fast-flowing to safely cross with our backpacks. In fact, the river had risen enough that we weren't even sure if the place we were looking for was still there or not. We naturally tried to find somewhere else to sleep. We ended up walking much farther ahead and still couldn't find a good place. We eventually had to stop when I couldn't walk any further because my legs hurt too badly and it was getting dark. Finally, we set up camp in a hollow dip between two hills, which was a big mistake. Funny thing about hollows is that they're creepy as hell. All the plants that grew there were sickly looking. Mostly leafless and thin, just pale sticks jutting from the ground at varying angles. There was such a high density of the creepy plants or small trees that you couldn't see very far away either. A thick tarp of rotting and crispy leaves covered the ground, up to my ankles. With every step I took through them, I felt paranoid thinking that a copperhead would bite me. Sound can carry far in hollows, so you can't easily tell how close or far away something is. And the feeling that something was boring its eyes into our backs couldn't be shook. Suffice to say, going off to use the bathroom in these conditions was not ideal at all. We had to rip some of the gangly sticks out of the ground to make room for our tents, and by the time we were done setting everything up, it was dark. After eating dinner, we retired to our tent. Our tent was a two-person tent, but all three of us squeezed in there, because none of us had the gut to sleep in the one-person tent. We would always talk and joke around, while I stretched before going to sleep. This night was no different, and before we knew it, we were all laughing pretty hard. Suddenly my mom and grandma stopped dead in their tracks and told me to turn on the flashlight we had hanging from the tent roof. They were listening to something carefully in a way that immediately put me on edge. I asked them what was going on because I couldn't hear anything. They said they could hear what sounded like a man screaming, as if he was being tortured horribly. We were as silent as possible for a long time. At first, I thought they must be joking with me because I couldn't hear anything. It was obvious that they were listening for something though, and deep down, my instincts were telling me that this was a sketchy situation. I was so still that I'm pretty sure my heartbeat slowed down. After a while we decided to try and sleep. What else were we supposed to do? It's not like there was any cell service. And even if there was, help wouldn't arrive for a long time, seeing as how we were in the wild. None of us slept well, despite the screaming having stopped. I kept waking up at the smallest noises, which were usually just my mom or grandma making slight sounds in their sleep. At one point, there was the sound of something moving outside the tent. In my heightened state of awareness, I sensed that it was just raccoons. This was later confirmed in the next morning, when my grandma said she thought she heard raccoons trying to get to our food, which had been hung up in a tree. This was one of the longest nights of my life. It seemed like it would never end until it finally did. When I opened my restless eyes to find that the sun had actually rose, I was flooded with relief. We got ready for the day's hike, packed up our stuff, and got out of there. The rest of our nights weren't so bad. When the end of the week came, my mom's cousin picked us up from a public campsite we made to. We told him about the freaky night in the hollow. He thought what we heard could have been a mountain lion, as they can sound like a person screaming. I looked up a YouTube video of mountain lion sounds when we got to a place with internet. My mom and grandma said that could have been it. By the way they sound, I can easily see how they could be mistaken for a human, screaming in agony from a distance. As for why I couldn't hear the mountain lion, I'm not entirely sure. I suspect that I can't hear certain animals from far away, because I discovered that, apparently the neighborhood dogs bark at night. And I only found this out when my parents were complaining about them, and saying they were annoying. I can't hear them barking. I don't seem to have any other problems hearing though, so I'm not sure.